There are certain things that men say that will instantly tell you that you are not dealing with a safe person. And a lot of women don't even realize what they're actually trying to do with those comments.
Tell you on my worldview?
Yes.
Your wife has 3 baby daddies and has been married twice before.
And you
You
lick sniz.
Under your religion.
You lick sniz.
What does that
You're
mean?
a fucking dyke. Don't talk shit about my wife, you stupid bitch. Shut your fucking mouth.
So today I'm breaking down what's really underneath them and what those comments reveal about the men who are saying them. As if it's not bad enough that we live in a world where women have to actively warn other women about danger, where we have to give each other tips on how to avoid ending up in abusive relationships, how to stay safe, how to notice things early enough to get out. That alone is already unfair. That's already more responsibility than we should have to carry. And then what happens? Women get blamed for ending up in abusive situations. We're told we should have known better. We should have seen it sooner. We should have chosen differently. But when women try to create awareness so that other women can avoid these types of situations, we're blamed for that too. That's where it starts to mess with your head. Because now we're being criticized no matter what we do. If you don't warn, it's your fault for not knowing. If you do warn, it's your fault for talking about it. But here's the part that people don't ask. Why does women warning each other trigger this much hostility? What is it about women being informed that bothers these men so deeply? You also hear this when women are harmed, when women are raped, when women are killed. These same men don't focus on the men who did it. They go straight into blame. What was she wearing? How much did she drink? Why was she there alone? Women get attacked by these men for warning each other. And women get attacked by these men when they're hurt. Either way, women get blamed. And when I hear the phrases these men drop under relationship and safety content, I already know the men saying it have a history of being abusive. One of the most common ones is this: women should choose better. Some others I often see: abusers don't pick you, you pick abusers. And when you actually listen to these comments, it's not concern you hear under them. It's anger. There's a resentment there that shows up every time women start talking to each other, sharing information, warning each other about danger. You can hear how bothered they are by it, how much they want these conversations shut down. Men who are safe are not threatened by women protecting themselves or others. They don't react with hostility when women share experiences. That reaction only shows up when something is being disrupted. What these men are really bothered about is women becoming harder to fool, harder to trap, and harder to isolate. That's why those comments sound the way that they do. And I'm about to show you why your reaction to these types of comments is right, and exactly how dangerous the men making them are. Abusive men don't show up abusive in the beginning. That fact alone destroys everything that they're implying. They don't walk into your life yelling and threatening or making it obvious that they're dangerous. They actually usually show up quite well. They're attentive, they're kind, they're thoughtful, they appear safe. And that's not accidental. That is how they create access. Because if abuse actually looked like abuse right from the beginning, nobody would stay. Nobody would get attached. Nobody would trust them long enough for it to work. So when men say things like women should choose better, what they're really doing is pretending that danger is obvious. They're pretending that abuse announces itself, that it's easy to spot, that women are knowingly choosing harm. So that belief only works if you completely ignore how abuse actually happens. And this is why I can say without hesitation that the men who leave comments like that are abusive themselves. Because look at where their anger goes. It doesn't go towards the man who caused the harm. It goes towards women, toward women talking, toward women warning each other, towards women trying to stay safe. That tells you exactly who they identify with. When women speak up, when women compare notes, when women try to make sense of what happened to them, these men feel attacked, not because they're confused, but because those conversations threaten something that works for them. That reaction isn't accidental. It's self-protective. They're not reacting like outsiders watching a problem. They're reacting like people who benefit from the problem staying quiet. Sound familiar? And that's why I don't hear comments like that as opinions. I hear them as tells. And if that still sounds abstract to someone, if they still want to pretend it's just a bad take or a difference of opinion, then let's talk about the men who didn't just abuse one woman, but targeted women over and over again. Because this is where comments like women should choose better completely fall apart. Let's take Ted Bundy. He didn't walk up to women acting dangerous. He didn't announce himself as a predator. He didn't show up as abusive. He showed up charming, intelligent, polite, harmless.
Murders do not come out in the dark with long teeth and saliva dripping off the chin. People don't realize that Donatello is among them. People they like, loved, lived with, worked with, and admired. And then they turn out to be the most demonic people imaginable.
So harmless, in fact. Women trusted him enough to help him. That's how he got access. So when someone says women should have chosen better, chosen differently, known sooner, you have to ask, better than what? Because the version of him that they met was designed to disarm them. And it wasn't just him. Take Rodney Alcala. He was so charming, so confident, so normal seeming that he was literally selected as a contestant on a dating show.
Bachelor number 3, your buddy's drawn a blank. Do you want to help them out?
With his theory of special relativity?
Yeah.
Whether it's for a minute or for an hour, I'd like to sit relatively close to a special girl whenever I get the chance. How's that?
That's pretty good.
Women watched him flirt on television, laugh, make conversation, come across as likable, all while he was still actively committing violent crimes against women. So what exactly were his victims supposed to choose better then? The version of him that the world saw wasn't accidental. It was curated because women are conditioned to manage discomfort, to not be rude, to not embarrass someone, to not make an awkward situation worse. So instead of listening to that instinct that something fell off, they minimized it. They stayed polite. They stayed present. And for some of them, that conditioning cost them their lives. If you want to understand more about how social conditioning puts women in danger, how we're taught to override our instincts in ways that predators rely on, I've done a full video on that, and I'll link it in the description. And if this isn't scary enough, I haven't even told you what's most revealing about the men who make comments like this. These men don't see abuse as harm. They see it as something that only counts once it's extreme. When they say things like, women should choose better, or abusers don't pick you, you pick them, what they're really saying is that harm doesn't count unless it was obvious enough for them to notice. That if a woman didn't see it coming, that's on her. That the man's behavior only becomes a problem once it's impossible to deny. That tells you exactly how they think. To them, manipulation isn't abuse. Control isn't abuse. Lying, coercion, slowly breaking someone down, isolating them, making them doubt themselves. None of that registers as harm. Those are just tools. And that's why they react the way they do when women talk, when women start naming patterns. Because those conversations don't just expose bad behavior, they expose the rules they're operating by. Those men aren't afraid of being falsely accused. They're afraid of being accurately understood. They're afraid of women learning that abuse doesn't start with violence. It starts with charm, with pressure, with confusion, with slow erosion of boundaries that never looks dramatic in the moment. So when these men hear women warning each other, and their instinct is to shut it down, to mock it, to blame women instead of questioning the behavior, that's not ignorance. He recognizes himself somewhere in that story. And instead of distancing himself from it, he defends it. And this is why it matters. Because this isn't how a small group of internet trolls thinks. This is how these men think in real life. They're not announcing themselves. They're not standing apart from the rest of society. They're integrated. They're ordinary. They're the guy sitting next to you on the subway, the coworker in the cubicle next to you, the guy nobody would ever suspect. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because when women start talking openly, when they start warning each other, those conversations don't just expose extreme abuse. They expose everyday behavior that hides in plain sight. Behavior these men recognize not as shocking, but as familiar. So when a man hears women warning each other and his instinct is to shut it down, he's not worried about women being wrong. He's worried about women seeing clearly. And once you understand that, you stop brushing those kinds of comments off as men just being annoying. You start seeing them for what they actually are. A warning sign for how dangerous the men saying them really are. These men aren't just online. They are in the world that we move through every day, woven into our workplaces, our neighborhoods, our daily routines. And that's why women feel the fear that they do. It's not because we're dramatic. It's not because we're paranoid. Because on some level, we already knew this isn't theoretical. And if your gut is telling you that you've seen this before, just not in situations this extreme, you're right. And once I show you how this kind of thinking shows up in everyday conversations with men, you'll be able to spot it without doubting yourself. Because it's true, this doesn't just show up in extreme cases. When we talk about abuse on this level, it can feel very big and intense. But this same way of thinking shows up on even a much smaller scale all the time. And I know that because I see it constantly. In my line of work, I see the patterns repeat over and over again, which makes them easier to recognize. When you see the same reactions, the same deflections, the same attempts to shut things down again and again.
You're obsessed with finals clubs. You have finals clubs OCD and you need to see someone about it.
Final clubs. Not finals clubs.
You start to understand what's really happening underneath. In real life, though, you don't always get that luxury of time. You're in a conversation, things move quickly. You don't always have time to stop and think why something felt off or why a comment bothered you the way that it did. And that's why getting familiar with these patterns ahead of time matters so much. Because once you recognize them, you don't freeze. You don't doubt yourself. You trust what you're picking up on. Because a lot of the time, it shows up in really simple ways. Someone will ignore what you're actually saying and latch on to something that doesn't even matter. Not because it's relevant, not because it changes the point, but because it's easier to attack the delivery than to engage with the message. It might be the way you worded something, a phrase that you used, a minor detail that they pretend undermines everything else that you said. And notice how none of that actually addresses the situation. That's not an accident. That's a power move. Because when someone can't control the conversation, the next best thing is to destabilize the person speaking, to make you question yourself, to pull the focus away from what's being said and put it back on you. And this part matters because abuse at every level comes down to power. Whether it's extreme or subtle, the goal is the same: to regain control when it feels like it's slipping. That's also why there's a contradiction that you should really pay attention to. The same men that complain about women having high standards, the same men that mock women for being picky or expecting too much, well, these are the same men that you often hear saying women should choose better. But both things can't be true. So when you see that contradiction clearly, it tells you a lot. Because the problem was never women choosing. The problem is women choosing themselves. And here's what actually determines whether you stay safe or get pulled into their control. What keeps you from getting pulled into their control is actually quite simple. You stop engaging with the part of the conversation that isn't real. Because once you've clocked what they're doing, anything that comes after that isn't about understanding. It's about pulling you into defending yourself, explaining yourself, or fixing something that was never broken. So you don't do that. You don't answer the side comment. You don't chase the irrelevant point. You don't repeat yourself and try to make it land better. You stay exactly where you were. That's it. The moment you feel the conversation slip away from the actual point, you don't follow it. Because the only way that this tactic works is if you keep participating. And most women don't realize that opting out is an option. You don't need to call it out. You don't need to name it. You don't need to prove anything. You just stop giving it energy. That's how you stay grounded. Not by being sharper or more articulate, not by letting them pull you away from the point. That's what keeps it from working. It's understanding if this episode felt unsettling. You're recognizing something that you've likely felt before, but couldn't make sense of it. Those comments that just feel off, the ones that suddenly had you questioning yourself instead of the point being made. Now you know they aren't random. Those comments are strategy, and you don't need to confront them. You don't need to debate them, and you definitely don't need to explain yourself. Because the women who stay safest aren't the ones who argue the hardest. They're the ones that disengage early. If this episode helped you, send it to someone else that you think could benefit from this information. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, don't argue with distortion.